Hey guys, what's up? So I am here for my last video of 2017 and this is going to be my top 10 albums of 2017. So I will start with the honorable mentions here and they will be right here. We have brand new science fiction, Harry Styles' self-titled album, Turnover's Good Nature, and Ed Sheeran's Divide. So at number 10, I have Tiger's Jaw's album Spin. This is probably the most mature Tiger's Jaw record. I'm not just saying that too because it's a new album, but they really have departed from more of that kind of pop punk sound. Their lyrics are a lot more developed and they're really talking about a lot of different things on this album. They talk about being there for a friend, they talk about working on your mental health and staying away from the people that are doing damage to your mental health. A lot of this album touches on that. And it almost kind of stays in the same vein of their last album, Charmer. It has very similar guitar tones, kind of similar vocal ranges as well from Ben as well as Brianna. I think this album though is the best album with them collaboratively together. Brianna and Ben are now the only two sole members of Tiger's Jaw, and they really split this album down the middle with who did what writing, as well as just them having an equal amount of vocal parts. My top 3 favorites off of this album are June, Blurry Vision, and Window. Number 9 is As You Please by Citizen. This is probably one of the best emo grunge albums of the year. This album does a great job of having this edgy grittiness to it, but also keeping really strong melodic tone. The vocalist Matt really explores his range on this album and almost has his style is almost a combination of their previous record as well as their first record. He still kind of keeps this angstiness, but also he's doing a lot more melodic stuff with his voice. You also hear him singing in a lot more higher ranges too. This album also does a great job with the guitar and the bass really working well together and being the backbone for this album. Mostly the bass work because you don't really hear the bass a lot in a lot of records. It's almost kind of just on the back burner and not that noticeable, but on pretty much every song on As You Please, it really is a focal point and adds so much to the songs. My 3 favorites off of this album are In the Middle of It All, Flower Child, and Medicine. Number 8 for me is Code Orange's Forever. This album is definitely, in my opinion, the best metal album of the year. If you want to call it metal, metalcore, whatever, I'm calling it metal. Just by a band that's still so new and really developing the genre of metal, they do such a great job. They add a lot more style and substance to the metal sounds. A lot more of the breakdowns in this album have a little bit of this rhythmic touch to it that just adds so much more to the songs than just a formulaic breakdown. And this album also has me feeling like I'm on the edge of my seat every time I listen to it. Throughout this album, not necessarily in every song, you kind of hear these little pause breaks just like randomly in the songs. And they really add this gripping suspense when you're listening to it because it's almost like your heartbeat stops for a second or you stop breathing and then you take another breath again. It's almost like that's what that album feels. And also the songwriting on this album is very well developed. They talk a lot on this album too just about mental health and the state of the world. So I really enjoyed this record, definitely the heaviest record of the year for me in my opinion. My top 3 favorite tracks are Spy, Bleeding in the Blur, and The Mud. Number 7 for me is Kendrick Lamar's Damn. This record is my favorite by far rap album of the year. There's a lot of rap albums that came out this year that were a huge letdown to me. Not that I really had high expectations to begin with, but it was just really mediocre lyrics and music from a lot of artists in that scene. But Kendrick Lamar really killed it on this album. I think, in my opinion, the best way to describe this album is just everything. It kind of, in my opinion, defines what 2017 in America is. He talks a lot on this album about greed, money, people's social statuses, but also about being humble, remembering where you came from, and being a respectful human being. Kendrick gets very personal on this album, and he gives a lot of his opinion and point of view, like I said, on the United States, politics, social justice. And from start to finish, this album flows very well. It's really well put together from the opening track, Blood, with a little bit of dialogue in it, to the very end of this song on Duckworth. And my personal favorites from this album are Element, Humble, and Fear. Number 6 for me is Phoebe Bridgers with her album Stranger in the Alps. She's a pretty new upcoming artist. This is actually her debut album, and I never heard of Phoebe Bridgers before. A couple of musicians that I know from bands were talking about how good her record was, and they're like, you gotta check out this debut. They were posting it on their social media, and Julian Baker also being one of those people promoting her new album. I decided to check it out, and I was really glad that I did. This album blew me away for a debut album from a singer-songwriter. A lot of these songs are striking and very heart-wrenching, but more in a minimalistic way. She writes some really dark and moody stuff with minimal instrumentation that have a really smooth folk tinge to it. She has a pretty soft, toned-down voice, but it really has a fire and a passion to it on some of the moments on this album. A lot of this album has some really nice guitar effects to it, a lot of reverb. It feels kind of spacey and atmospheric in a way for a folk album, but it has some well-written songs. It's one of those singer-songwriter albums that you don't get bored with. I think some people kind of have a hard time getting into that type of music because it can go so many different ways, but she does a good job of kind of focusing it but also broadening it at the same time. And my favorites off of this album are Georgia, Funeral, and Demi Moore. Number 5 on my list is the Maine's Lovely Little Lonely. I really got so much more into this band actually in 2017. It was ridiculous. I saw this band live I think 3 or 4 times this year. They did a lot of touring and they were promoting this album a lot, so just seeing a lot of these songs live, especially the album played in its full. The Maine pushes the limit to expand their sound, blending slight guitar tones of American Candy with really catchy melodies. Also adding these dark tendencies of using keys and synth. This album has a beautiful flow to it and really makes it an easy listen from start to finish. A lot of these songs just perfectly flow intertwined together, and I think what really helps are the 3 interludes on this album, Lovely, Little, and Lonely. They just really put this album together, and I think without the interludes, this album wouldn't have such a big impact. My personal favorites from this one are The Sound of Reverie, Black Butterflies and Deja Vu, and I Only Want to Talk to You. Number 4 for me is Lord's Melodrama. She really does make pop art a thing with this album. If I had to pick an album that really defines pop art, I would say it's this album hands down. Each song has a little bit of over-the-topness relating to the album's title, Melodrama, without it being too obnoxious, whether it's in the lyrics or the instrumentation overall. And the production and the sound on this album is a lot broader compared to her last album, Pure Heroine, where it was kind of a little bit more bare bone. And a lot of the writing on this album really expands when she's talking about just different relationships and trying to fit in with people. I will say till the day I die that Liability is my favorite song of the year. My favorite tracks off of this album are Liability, Hard Feelings / Loveless, and Supercut. Top 3 on this list. It was incredibly hard for me to pick these top 3 and to put them in what order. If I had a choice, if it was a thing, I wish I could put all of these albums at number 1 because these 3 albums really were what I was mostly listening to in 2017 the moment they came out and made a huge impact on me. The number 3 is Paramore's After Laughter. Paramore, if you guys didn't know, is one of my top 5 favorite bands. I really love this band so much, and they've always been a band that's really tried to expand their sound. They've really just tried to always come about their albums naturally. I feel like they don't force anything when they're writing and recording, but they also do a fantastic job of still staying true to what they are, which is Paramore, and still keeping that foundation. Through lineup changes and some little bit of drama with like court issues and such, Paramore really brings themselves back with After Laughter. Zach Farrow, who was the old drummer in their first 3 records, is finally back on this album, and it literally feels like he never left the band. There's no awkwardness, it's just like he fit right into this missing puzzle piece that the band really needed. Taylor and Zach collaboratively wrote a lot of different things on this album, whether it be the music itself, the lyrics. They all worked really well together just to produce such a amazing album. A lot of this album has more of a strong 80s, slight pop rock influence, but without it sounding too stale. I feel like a lot of bands that are trying to go for this more 80s sound, it's like you've either heard it before or it just sounds too cheesy, but on this record, they still do a great job of keeping things fresh. There's excellent groovy bass lines on this album that are super earwarming, as well as some really nice guitar hooks by Taylor. And the drums on this album have this groove to their own that just works really well with the bass, as well as these fun, catchy melodies that really make this a staple point for the band. The upbeat music contrasting with the sad lyrics, I think, really gives the idea of what After Laughter means. Haley said in an interview that when you see somebody done laughing, they almost have this sad, disappointed look on their face. A lot of the songs on here really hit home for me in so many ways and have really helped me through a lot of hard times this year. Hard times. Very bad pun, very bad. But my favorite songs on this album are Tell Me How, Idol Worship, and Rose Colored Boy. 2 on my list is The Amulet by Circa Survive. As you guys know, Circa Survive is like one of my top 3 favorite bands. They're like my 3rd favorite band. I've loved this band since sophomore year of high school. Anthony Green is somebody who I've always looked up to as a writer and just an overall musician. On this album, I feel like they're trying to push more of this prog rock style. Many of these songs build and transform into something serene and passionate, or at times even bombastic. Vocally, Anthony did a great job singing in his usual higher register, but also adding a lot of an edge with the more raspy side. As usual, Circa Survive always has a lot of use of different guitar effects, loop pedals, a lot of unique sounds, and on this album they don't hold back from that. There's also a lot of really slick bass work on some of this album too, which I really appreciate. And as usual, phenomenal drumming from Steven. He was one of my absolute favorite drummers ever. Anthony, as a songwriter, I think really pushes himself more on this album with a lot more use of imagery, and he kind of talks about his point of views on the state of the world and greed and power. There's also a huge sense of fantasy on this album, which makes it a really great record to listen to in the winter. As I was listening to this record, driving down, seeing snow on the ground, it just really put more of the mood of what this album is. And I think a lot of that helps with the production on this album, as well as the different effects with the guitar work and the imagery that Anthony Green uses lyrically on this album. It was really hard again to pick 3 favorite songs, but mine would have to be Tunnel Vision, The Amulet, and Stay. For my number 1 pick, which I don't think a lot of people would have expected this. Maybe they do if they follow me on social media, possibly. But number 1 for me is Julian Baker's Turn Out the Lights. This is her 2nd album, and if you guys didn't know, because I haven't really talked about her as much as I'd like to, and I really wish I had time to review this album, she's one of my favorite singer-songwriters. She writes a lot of very emotional, melancholy songs about being alone and struggling with her mental illnesses like anxiety and depression, and also struggling with her faith as well, spiritually. The minimalistic instrumentation on this album really brings out the focal point being Julian's voice as well as her lyrics. She has such a powerful voice, and on a lot of these songs she really makes it shine. Julian expands a lot more on this album of her struggles, and even musically on this album, use of violin and piano in it. From start to finish, this album really feels like a true piece of work to me. I think what really stood out to me about this album is when you listen to it from the first song, which is the intro song, very short, Over, you almost hear somebody like walking into a room. They open like a door. It sounds like they're sitting down. So it feels like she's literally sitting down in her room with her instruments, just playing these songs, whether she's playing them alone to herself or maybe to somebody else in the room. And then at the very end of the last track, Claws in Your Back, you hear somebody leave. And I think that's the really special thing about this album, is it feels like she's sitting in this room just letting her heart pour out, whether it's to herself or to somebody. The first moment I listened to this album, I really connected with a lot of the songs on here. I've always have felt like on Julian's last release and even this release, like how much me and her relate is crazy. And I feel such a strong connection with these songs, and they really have helped me through a lot of shit this year. And she's always been somebody that I just really look up to as an artist. She has impeccable songwriting, and she's just a really sweet person. I've gotten the honor to meet her twice, and it also is crazy too how me and her are both gay, but we're both spiritual, we're both Christians, we both believe in God, and I just love how she can write that in such a way where it feels really real to me, like somebody else gets it. My favorite tracks on this album are Happy to Be Here, Sour Breath, and Televangelist. It was really hard to pick a favorite. But if you haven't checked out any of these albums, please check them out, guys. Like, I promise you'll at least find something you like. I think there's something on this list for everybody, really. A lot of these albums that are on my top this year, I feel like are really heavy lyrically. Most of them are kind of like sad, but it's really made such a huge connection with me. What did you think of my list? If you enjoyed this video and want to see more from me, please hit the button that looks like this down there. That'd be super awesome. And subscribe to this channel if you're new, because next year I'm really going to, in 2018, really going to push doing different stuff with this channel, because I really want this channel to grow. And comment down below, let me know some of your favorites. There was some awesome music this year, and I really wish I could go more into detail talking about these albums. But if you want to see some of my full reviews of some of these albums down below, I will put them in the description. As always, stay brutal, stay tuned for more videos, and see you guys later.